He hadn't touched a woman in 12 long years. And the first one to fall into his arms again was nearly torn apart by hell itself. Ethan Caldwell stood frozen boots rooted in the dry red dirt as she collapsed before him. No name, no scream, just two whispered words, "Please, don't." Her body trembled, marked by cruel symbols scorched into her flesh, a haunting sigil of the Blackthorn Consortium. A shadowy empire of pain, thought long dead. Ethan's past roared back, the girl in Tennessee, the one he couldn't save, her eyes mirrored in this stranger's desperate gaze. Not again. He scooped her into his arms, light as regret, warm as danger, and carried her into his cabin where the walls seemed to listen. But deep in his bones, Ethan knew this wasn't over. A storm was rising, and somewhere in the canyon shadows a reckoning was riding toward them. Will Ethan and this mysterious woman survive the wrath of Blackthorn? Keep reading to uncover the heart-pounding truth. Don't miss a single moment of their fight for redemption. Ethan Caldwell wasn't looking for salvation. He'd hung his guns and his hope up a decade ago, buried them somewhere between Tennessee's blood-soaked fields and the dusty hills of northern Arizona. Now he just lived quiet alone in a cabin halfway up the ridge, with one rocking chair, one creaking floorboard that always called back the past, and a bottle of whiskey older than most regrets. That morning the sky was dry and sullen, the kind of day where the air tastes like ash even before a fire starts. Ethan was chopping wood, axe steady, breath slow, when the trees across the clearing rustled like they were being chased. Then she came. Barefoot, bloody, wrapped in what used to be a white curtain, now no cleaner than grave linen. Her eyes found him like a ghost. Spots a grave it ain't ready to leave. Skin torn raw, her lips cracked from more than just thirst, and on her back symbols, brands, cruel things no decent soul should ever lay on another human being. She collapsed in front of him, no name, no scream, just those two words whispered like a dying prayer. Ethan froze, his boots rooted in that dry red dirt like judgment itself. She didn't bleed much on the outside, but her body trembled like it had crawled through fire and frost all at once. He stepped forward. She winced but didn't pull away. That's when the curtain slipped and he saw it, letters scorched into flesh marks, curved and cruel, a sigil he'd only seen once in a war not fought on maps, a private war run by men with money and no faces, the mark of Blackthorn Consortium, not just slavers, but orchestrators of pain running off the map mines, correctional camps. The kind where people go in and don't come back unless it's in pieces. He'd thought they were gone, wiped out in a federal raid a decade back. But now that ghost from the past was branded on a woman barely holding herself together. Ethan staggered, not from the horror of it, but from the memory. The girl in Tennessee, same eyes, same scars. He hadn't saved her. He'd walked away, not again. He dropped his coat slowly and wrapped it around the woman like it was holy. No words, no questions, just action. He scooped her into his arms and carried her inside. The cabin swallowed them both, and for the first time in over a decade it felt like the walls were listening again. But even as he laid her down on the cot by the fire, even as he moved with the quiet of a man who knew pain's voice by heart, Ethan felt it in his bones. This wasn't over. This was the first gust of a storm he thought had died with his old uniform and dog tags. And somewhere deep in the canyon shadows, or behind some fat banker's grin, a reckoning had already begun riding toward him. The cabin wasn't much, just four walls, a stove older than statehood, and the kind of quiet that settled in like dust, unshaken, untouched. But that night the wind carried something else through the cracks, not fear, not hope, just breath, two souls breathing under the same roof. Ethan laid her gently on the cot by the back wall, the fire already snapping in the stove like it had a story to tell. The woman Lila, though he wouldn't know that for another day, clung to his coat like it held the world together. Her eyes didn't move, just stared at the ceiling like something might drop from it. He didn't ask questions, didn't speak. Instead, he brewed a pot of coffee bitter enough to strip rust. It gave his hands something to do. The ritual of it, the grind, the heat, the pour, felt like grounding after the shock. Outside, the moon hung low over the pines. Coyotes howled distant, but inside it was only the crackling wood and the heartbeat of something trying to grow where nothing had lived for years. She flinched at every creak, even the wind brushing the shutters made her tighten her grip, but she didn't cry. And that silence was worse than screaming. On the shelf above the stove sat a tin box, dented and worn, a box Ethan hadn't opened in years. Inside, a photograph, yellowed and soft at the edges, a girl with braids and eyes too big for her age, standing beside a soldier who didn't smile right, his niece Sophie. Gone before she even had a life. That box hadn't mattered in a long time. But now he pulled it down and left it, a silent offering, on the table near Lila. She didn't reach for it, but she looked just a flicker, and that was enough. That night she didn't sleep, not really, just drifted in and out like her mind couldn't decide if this place was a trap or a miracle. But near dawn she turned her head. Her eyes met his, Ethan still in the chair by the door, shotgun across his lap, more ghost than man. One word, soft as a breath breaking ice water. He moved slowly, no sudden motions, poured a cup and knelt like he was offering gold. She took it with both hands, shaking slightly, but didn't spill a drop. She didn't thank him, didn't need to. That look, that hollow glance with a glint buried deep down, said everything. I'm still here. Ethan nodded like a man who'd once buried comrades in shallow trenches and learned that sometimes surviving is the loudest thing you can do. What do you think Lila's story is? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's unravel her past together as the tale unfolds. That day passed slowly. She didn't speak again, but she moved small things, looked at the fire, held the coat tighter, breathed deeper. Near dusk, Ethan stepped outside to carve a busted chair leg, the same piece of wood he'd ignored for 2 winters. Then soft steps behind him. Lila. She sat on the porch steps, didn't say anything, just looked out at the trees like they owed her an explanation. And then she spoke. They used to make me clean their boots. Ethan kept carving, didn't flinch, just let the sound of knife on wood fill the space between her words and his silence. She didn't speak again for a long while, not until the sun had begun bleeding into the tree line, painting the pines in rust and gold. Ethan was still whittling, fingers steady from years of knowing how not to shake even when everything inside him did. Lila just sat there, elbows on her knees, staring like she was trying to track something invisible between the trees. Then quiet as a wind passing through bones. Second time I ran, they carved my back open. Ethan didn't say a word, she didn't look at him. First time they broke my nose, said I was lucky that pretty girls bring higher bids. They laughed when they said it. The wind shifted. She pulled the coat tighter. It was a camp, mining mostly, but not official. No payroll, no maps, just men with guns and a big hole in the earth they kept filling with blood and silver. Ethan's jaw tensed the way a man does when something old and familiar starts to crawl up from the cellar of his memory. Blackthorn, she said, so soft it barely made the air. The name hit like thunder in a canyon. Ethan had heard it before in whispers and confessions from dying men in the trenches, a private company. If you could call a den of wolves that fronted by mining claims but fed by flesh. They'd vanished after the war, at least that's what folks told themselves. They marked the ones they broke the worst, Lila said. Said it was to keep track of repeat runners, but I think they just liked it, liked watching pain take shape. She paused, eyes tracing the scars only she could still feel. One of them had a gold tooth, called himself Gideon, used to hum hymns while he worked the whip, said God didn't mind if the dirt got cleaned with sinners. Ethan stopped carving. He didn't look at her, but his grip on the knife changed like it might not stay a tool for long. Lila looked down at her hands. The last time the third escape, I didn't get out alone. Her voice caught. That's when Ethan turned his head. There was a girl, Lila whispered, 17, named Nora. She was all bone, and Hope said. Her brother was looking for her, hadn't eaten in 2 days, but still smiled like the moon belonged to her. Ethan swallowed. They caught us before we hit the river. I kept running. I heard her scream, but I didn't stop. Silence fell, the kind of silence that eats up oxygen. I don't know if she's alive. I don't even know if I'm allowed to hope she is. Ethan didn't answer, couldn't. Instead, he walked inside. A minute later, he returned with a small, battered harmonica. He placed it beside her without explanation. The metal was scratched, faded initials on the side, TW. My brother's, he said after a beat. Carried it through Shiloh, and Chickamauga played it once. The night the war ended, said it was the only thing that ever sounded louder than gunfire. Lila ran her finger along its edge, slow, careful. He didn't make it home, Ethan added. Neither did I, not really. Their eyes met, no pity, just recognition, like two wild things sniffing the same old wound. She picked up the harmonica and held it against her chest like a heartbeat. And for the first time, she didn't tremble. 3 days passed quiet, but not the kind of quiet that meant peace. It was the kind that pressed against your ribs and asked how long you planned on breathing before it all went to hell. Ethan didn't cut wood, didn't check his snares. He just cleaned that old shotgun over and over like it was a sermon he couldn't stop repeating. Lila noticed she didn't ask, but she started sleeping with her boots on. By late afternoon of the 4th day, the wind died, no birds, no bugs, no nothing. Then came the dust rising on the ridge road like smoke from a bad memory. Hooves 3 horses, one of them walked like it carried a man who thought the world owed him something and wasn't shy about collecting. Ethan stepped onto the porch, shotgun slung but ready. Lila stood just inside the doorway, hands clenched, eyes dry. She wasn't shaking this time. The first rider was the same greasy smirk who'd come days earlier, vest fancier, mustache wetter, but the same eyes, a man who enjoyed breaking things he didn't build. The second was taller, wore a bowler hat like it meant something. But the third, he was the one that made Ethan's stomach go tight, riding a black gelding, long black coat, dusty but tailored and teeth flashing beneath a gold-capped sneer, Gideon. He hadn't changed. Ethan Caldwell, Gideon said, as if tasting the name like an old cigar. Didn't expect to find you tucked away like some retired preacher. Ethan didn't answer. Gideon dismounted, slow boots crunching dry pine needles. The wind shifted and brought the smell of cigars and something burnt. Something that didn't come off skin easy. You've got something belongs to me, Gideon said, gaze sliding toward the doorway. Girl named Lila Rose. Ethan stepped off the porch. She don't belong to nobody. Gideon smiled like a man who found that funny in a disappointing way. That's where we disagree. The second man moved his hand toward his belt, barely a twitch. Ethan fired. The blast rang like thunder in the canyon. The man dropped, screaming, leg torn open, blood soaking dirt that hadn't seen rain in months. Gideon didn't flinch, just adjusted his gloves. Now that he said softly was a mistake. Before anyone could speak again, a voice cut through the trees like a blade through rawhide. I'd think real hard about your next move. From the shadows stepped a man with shoulders like railroad ties and a silver star glinting in the dying light, rifle in hand. Steady Isaac Boone, Ethan's old war buddy, now sheriff over 3 counties, maybe 4 if you ask the right kind of people. Gideon didn't blink. You want a war, Isaac? He asked. Isaac spat. Don't need a war, just enforcing trespass laws and moral decency, both of which you're piss poor at respecting." Gideon looked at the bleeding man on the ground, then at Ethan. "This ain't over," he said. "No," Ethan replied, cocking the shotgun again. "It's just starting." They left slowly, but not before Gideon leaned in close voice. Low, like a snake whispering through sagebrush. "She ran once, she'll run again. You won't be enough to stop it." Ethan didn't speak. He just stared until Gideon mounted up and rode out with dust in his teeth and hatred in his eyes. That night, Ethan didn't sleep. Neither did Lila, but this time they weren't waiting for trouble, they were planning for it. The sun cracked the next morning like a gunshot, the kind of light that doesn't warm, just reveals. Isaac Boone stayed the night, took his boots off, but never unstrapped his rifle, sat by the stove cleaning it like he was dressing a wound. Ethan poured coffee, thick, bitter, and handed him a mug without a word. Lila hovered near the window, watching, waiting, but not afraid. "They'll be back," she said flatly. Isaac nodded. "They always come back when they think they own something." Ethan ran a hand through his beard. "And Gideon thinks he owns pain." Isaac took a slow sip. "Then let's teach him foreclosure." They spent the day preparing. Ethan checked the traps, retrieved a tripwire he hadn't touched since he stopped believing in enemies. Isaac rode into town and came back with a crate of ammunition and a single envelope stamped with the seal of the Arizona Territorial Office. Inside was a warrant, not a fancy one, not official enough to reach headlines, but real enough to carry weight in this part of the country. Lila's name was on it as a protected witness. "How'd you get that?" Ethan asked. Isaac smirked. "You send me a note that smells like gunpowder and guilt, I get curious, dug a little." Turns out Blackthorn still got blood under their fingernails, enough folks whispering someone finally listened. That evening, Lila placed something on the table, a silver locket, dirt-caked and bent but still intact. Inside, a photo, faded, water-warped, a young girl, 17, smiling like the sun never left Nora. Ethan stared at it for a long time. "She was better than me," Lila whispered. "If we survive this, I want to find her or find the place she was buried, either way. I want her to know I didn't forget." Ethan looked at her. "You're not the same woman who crawled out of those woods." Lila met his eyes. "No, I'm not. I'm the one they didn't break." Later that night, with the cabin lit only by firelight, Isaac unfolded a map of the territory and marked 3 paths, only one led up the ridge. "Tomorrow," he said, "they ride into a trap." Ethan nodded. "Let's make sure it closes hard." The trap worked, not clean, not pretty, but it worked. 3 men rode up that ridge. The next morning, only one rode back down, and he wasn't the one who came looking for blood. Gideon wasn't among them. He stayed back. Sent his dogs ahead like cowards do, but when the smoke cleared, when the echo of gunfire faded into the hills, a telegram went out, and within the week a federal marshal showed up with chains and a list of names. Blackthorn was finally burning from the inside. But none of that felt like victory, not to Ethan. He sat on the porch 2 days later, boots up on the rail, watching dust settle in the yard. The shotgun was still near, but it hadn't been touched since it didn't need to be. Inside, Lila stirred a pot of stew. She moved without flinching now. Still quiet, still wary when the wind rose, but she didn't jump at shadows anymore. The locket rested on the windowsill. She polished it each morning, not obsessively, not with grief, with purpose, like it deserved to shine again. One morning she asked Ethan about his niece, the girl in the photo from the tin box. "Sophie," he said softly. "She was a firecracker, got in fights at school, stole an apple once just to see if she could outrun the sheriff. She could." Lila smiled, first real smile, not a twitch or a breath, an actual curl of the mouth, like it hurt less now to hope. "She would have liked you," Ethan said. "Think so. She liked truth, even the hard kind." Later that day, Lila brought in a basket of wildflowers, purple stubborn things that bloomed between rocks she didn't say. Where she found them, just placed them by the harmonica on the table. Ethan swept the porch for the first time in a decade. That night, they sat by the fire, stew between them. Boots scuffed and shoulders bruised, no talk of what came next, just the crackle of logs and the slow hum of something that sounded a lot like peace. After a long silence, Lila looked over. "You ever think, some folks ain't here to save others, maybe they're just supposed to give 'em space to save themselves?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked at the fire, then at her. "I think that's exactly what saving looks like." She nodded once, and in that moment neither of them was broken, not healed, not whole, but alive together. And out in the hills where the wind still carried stories older than any name, another tale had just begun. The story of Ethan Caldwell and Lila delivers profound life lessons about resilience, redemption, and the power of human connection. It reminds us that even in the face of unimaginable pain, the human spirit can endure and find strength to heal. Ethan's choice to act despite his haunted past teaches us that courage often lies in quiet, deliberate actions rather than grand gestures. Lila's journey from victim to survivor underscores the importance of reclaiming one's agency, showing that healing begins with space to rebuild oneself. Their shared silence and mutual understanding highlight how empathy can forge bonds that defy despair. The story urges us to confront our past, protect the vulnerable, and find purpose in standing against injustice. If this tale of hope and grit moved you, share, subscribe, and drop a comment below to keep the conversation alive.